Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we celebrate the power of compassion and the incredible ways it can transform lives. Today, we bring you the heartwarming story of a single mom whose small act of kindness in a grocery store changed her life forever with the help of a billionaire. Stay tuned for this inspiring tale of generosity, resilience, and second chances. The week before Christmas in Chicago was always a spectacle to behold. The streets were alive with the hustle and bustle of last-minute shoppers, the glow of holiday lights twinkling from every corner, and the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and pine. In a city known for its towering skyscrapers and cutting-edge architecture, there was something undeniably warm and comforting about the holiday season. But for Sarah Harris, a single mother of two, the festive spirit felt more like a cruel reminder of the things she couldn't afford. Sarah worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. Each day, she stood behind the register, scanning items and bagging groceries for customers who passed through without a second thought. Her days were long, her hours irregular, and yet, no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed enough. With rent overdue and bills piling up, the pressure of it all weighed heavily on her shoulders. And yet, amidst the daily grind, her children, Ethan and Olivia, remained her constant source of strength. They were the reason she carried on, even when everything seemed so difficult. On that particular evening, the grocery store was as busy as ever. The usual crowd of hurried shoppers filled the aisles, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of resignation. Christmas was just around the corner, yet it felt like another mountain she couldn't climb. As she rang up one item after another, her mind wandered back to the small apartment she and her children called home. The bills were mounting, and there seemed to be no way out. The reality of it all sat like a heavy stone in her chest. But in the midst of all her worries, Sarah's focus wavered as an elderly man rolled up to her register in a wheelchair. His clothes were old and worn, and he had the weathered look of someone who had seen far too much in life. His hands trembled as he tried to fish coins from his pocket, but the small pile of change he had wasn't enough to cover the cost of his groceries. His gaze was downcast, almost apologetic, and there was a quiet desperation in his eyes that made Sarah's heart ache. As she watched him struggle, Sarah's mind raced. She could feel the sharp sting of her own financial limitations, but she also knew what it felt like to be at the mercy of others. Without thinking, she reached into her purse and pulled out a few bills from her own wallet. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the difference. "It's okay," she said gently, offering him a reassuring smile. "I'll cover the rest." The old man looked up, his pale blue eyes wide with surprise. "You really don't have to do that," he said, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. Sarah smiled, trying to brush off her own feelings of unease. "It's not a big deal," she replied, but deep down, she knew that every dollar counted, especially with the holidays approaching. Still, something about the man's quiet dignity moved her, and she wanted to do what little she could. As the elderly man wheeled himself away, Sarah felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It was a small thing, but it was the right thing to do. She had helped him, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel proud of her decision. But before she could fully savor the feeling, the sound of footsteps approaching brought her back to reality. Her manager, Mr. Johnson, appeared, his face set in a stern frown. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had a bad feeling about this. "Sophie," Mr. Johnson barked, his tone sharp and cold. "My office. Now." Sarah hesitated for a moment, feeling a wave of anxiety flood through her. What had she done? She followed him into the small office at the back of the store, her mind racing with worry. The door shut behind her, and as she looked up, she saw Mr. Johnson's expression. It was unforgiving, and his voice when he spoke was low, controlled, and stern. "You can't just give away money like that," he said, his eyes narrowing. "We have policies. This is a business, not a charity. You can't take it upon yourself to decide when and where to give away the store's money." Sarah's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I wasn't giving away store money," she said, trying to explain. "I was just helping someone who needed it." But Mr. Johnson wasn't having it. His lips curled into a dismissive sneer as he glared at her. Your actions were reckless and irresponsible, he spat. We don't have room for that kind of behavior here. You're fired. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Fired? Just like that? It didn't seem real. She stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. But I was just trying to help, she said, her voice shaking. You've broken the most important rule, Mr. Johnson said, his voice ice cold. You don't get to make decisions like that. Go pack your things. You're done here. Sarah stood frozen, her entire body numb. Fired. She had just lost her job because she tried to do something good. How was she going to explain this to her children? The thought of what she would tell Ethan and Olivia made her feel dizzy. And yet, there was nothing she could do. She had no choice but to leave. The night that followed was restless. Sarah walked the small apartment in circles, her thoughts jumbled with anxiety and panic. Rent was due. The bills were piling up. And now, without a job, how was she supposed to provide for her children? She couldn't afford to lose hope. But everything felt impossible. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out a plan. But there seemed to be no way forward. The next morning, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. She stared at the job applications in front of her, but her mind couldn't focus. Everything seemed so overwhelming. She couldn't concentrate, couldn't think clearly. And then, just as she was about to give in to despair, there was a knock at the door. She stood up quickly, wiping her eyes as she walked toward the door. When she opened it, she was met by a sharply dressed man with a briefcase in hand. He looked formal, polite, but his demeanor was steady and sure. There was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself. Miss Sarah Harris? He asked, his voice smooth and deliberate. Yes, that's me, Sarah replied, still caught off guard. I'm Andrew Carter, attorney representing Mr. James Anderson, the man said, extending his hand. May I come in? Sarah blinked, her confusion deepening. Mr. Anderson, she repeated, trying to place the name. The man she had helped at the store? Andrew nodded, stepping inside. Mr. Anderson wanted to speak with you. He has a message for you. He handed her a sealed envelope. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. She read it, her heart pounding in her chest as the words sank in. Dear Ms. Harris, your kindness yesterday reminded me that there is still goodness in the world. I did not tell you this at the store, but I have been looking for someone to manage a foundation I have established to support veterans. You have shown the compassion and integrity that I value. If you're interested, my attorney will provide the details. With sincere appreciation, James Anderson. Sarah stared at the letter in disbelief. Is this real? She whispered. Andrew smiled warmly. Not only is it real, but Mr. Anderson has already transferred a year's salary into an account for you. As a gesture of goodwill, this is your second chance? Sarah's mind reeled. Just the day before, she had lost her job for helping someone. And now this billionaire, this man she had barely met, was offering her not just a second chance, but a whole new life. A year's salary, managing a foundation. It was more than she could have ever imagined. She sat down on the couch, her hands still trembling as she clutched the letter. The world around her felt as if it had shifted beneath her feet. Sarah sat in stunned silence, still holding the letter from Mr. James Anderson. The weight of the situation began to sink in, but the full reality was still hard for her to grasp. She had just lost her job the day before. And now, out of nowhere, a man she had helped in a brief moment of kindness was offering her something far greater than anything she could have imagined. A year's salary, a chance to manage a foundation. Her mind raced as she tried to process it all. She had worked so hard for so long just to keep her head above water. She had never considered that a single act of kindness could change the course of her life. But here she was, holding a letter from a billionaire offering her a second chance. Are you sure this is for me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Still trying to comprehend what was happening, she looked up at Andrew Carter, the attorney who had just delivered the news. Andrew nodded, a calm, reassuring smile on his face. Mr. Anderson is very serious about this. He's been looking for someone with compassion, someone who can lead with integrity. When he saw what you did for him, he knew you were the person he needed. But why me? Sarah's voice cracked. I'm just a cashier. I don't have any experience in running a foundation. I can't. You don't need to have experience. Andrew interrupted gently. What Mr. Anderson values is heart. He wants someone who understands the value of kindness. Someone who believes in making a difference. You've already proven you have that. He's willing to support you with the training and resources you need. Sarah stood up, her hands trembling as she paced around the small living room. The enormity of the offer was almost too much to take in. The day before, she had been in a state of despair, struggling to figure out how to feed her children, pay the bills, and keep her family afloat. Now, here was an opportunity that could change everything. Andrew handed her a business card, its edges sharp and professional. Mr. Anderson has scheduled a meeting with you tomorrow to discuss the details. He's very eager to meet you and explain more about the foundation and your potential role. Sarah nodded, still unsure how to respond. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Thank you for bringing me this opportunity. Andrew smiled. This is just the beginning. Ms. Harris, I suggest you think it over carefully, but I believe this is the start of something great for you. As the attorney left her apartment, Sarah stood by the door, staring at the card in her hand. It felt like a dream. She had always wanted to do something meaningful, something that made a difference in the world, but it had never seemed possible. And yet, here she was, facing an opportunity that could give her a purpose beyond anything she could have imagined. But despite the excitement, doubt crept in. She was just a single mother, with no formal education in nonprofit work or management. She had barely enough experience to make ends meet at the grocery store, let alone run a foundation. What if she failed? What if she let down the veterans who were relying on her? She shook her head, trying to push the doubts aside. She had worked hard for so long just to survive. But now she had the chance to build something meaningful, not just for her children, but for others. She couldn't let fear stop her from moving forward. The next day, Christmas Eve, Sarah woke up early and spent the morning preparing for the meeting with Mr. Anderson. She baked cookies with her children, Ethan and Olivia, trying to keep the day as normal as possible, despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The holiday season had always been a reminder of how little she had been able to give them in the past. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She tried not to dwell on the meeting too much as she helped her children decorate the tree. But she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She finished the day, dressed in her best clothes, trying to look as presentable as possible for the meeting. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain. This was her chance to prove herself. When she arrived at the building Mr. Anderson's attorney had told her about, she was immediately struck by the difference between this world and the one she had known. The building was grand and polished, gleaming with glass windows and festively decorated for the season. The contrast between the world she had worked in and the world she was about to step into was overwhelming. As she walked through the lobby, a receptionist greeted her and led her to a private office at the back of the building. When she walked in, she saw Mr. Anderson sitting at a large wooden desk, his presence commanding and warm at the same time. He stood up as she entered, his dark hair flecked with silver at the temples, his sharp blue eyes full of gratitude and respect. Ms. Harris, he said, his voice deep and smooth. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. Please, sit down. Sarah felt a nervous flutter in her chest as she sat across from him. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm still not sure how I ended up here. Mr. Anderson smiled, his gaze steady and kind. I understand your confusion. Sarah, when I first started this foundation, I knew I needed someone who could manage it, not just someone with the right credentials, but someone who had the right heart. When I met you at the store, I saw that heart. You didn't hesitate to help me, and that told me everything I needed to know. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had never expected that one small act of kindness could lead to something so significant. I don't have any experience managing a foundation, she said, her voice wavering with uncertainty. I don't know if I'm the right person for this job. Mr. Anderson leaned forward slightly, his expression warm but serious. You don't need to have experience. Sarah, what you have, what you showed me, is what matters most. Compassion. a willingness to help others. I'll provide you with all the training you need. I want someone who will understand the importance of our mission, someone who will truly care for the veterans we're supporting. You've shown me you're that person." Sarah sat in stunned silence. The enormity of it all hit her like a tidal wave. She had spent so many years just scraping by, doing what she could to make a living. But now, she was being offered the chance to make a real difference. She had always dreamed of something more, something meaningful, but she never thought it would come to her like this. "I'll do my best," Sarah said, her voice steadying as she looked Mr. Anderson in the eye. "I will work hard for you, for the veterans, and for my children." He smiled, and Sarah saw the confidence in his eyes. "That's all I ask. Sarah, you've already proven you have what it takes. This foundation is going to grow, and I want you to be a big part of it." As the meeting came to an end, Sarah felt a surge of excitement, mixed with fear. She had been given a second chance, an opportunity to do something she had always wanted. And while she still felt the weight of uncertainty, she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let this chance slip away. The world outside was blanketed in snow as Sarah walked out of the building, her heart full of hope for the first time in years. It was Christmas Eve, and the future suddenly seemed a little brighter. This was her second chance, her chance to help others and build a better future for her children. And this time, she wouldn't let anything stop her. This is the first part of the continuation. Would you like me to continue with the rest of the story in this style? The days following Sarah's meeting with Mr. Anderson felt like a whirlwind of emotions. Christmas came and went in a haze of excitement, uncertainty, and a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, Sarah had something to look forward to, something that didn't just involve surviving from one day to the next. She had been given an opportunity to truly make a difference, not just for herself, but for the many veterans who needed support. As the new year began, Sarah dove headfirst in her new role at the foundation. The transition from cashier to foundation manager wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges. She was still learning the ins and outs of nonprofit management, still adjusting to the responsibilities that came with the position. But Sarah's determination and heart, qualities Mr. Anderson had recognized in her from the start, were what pushed her forward. At the foundation, she worked tirelessly, overseeing the implementation of programs that provided veterans with job training, housing support, and mental health resources. Each day, she met new people whose stories of sacrifice and struggle moved her deeply. Sarah listened to their stories, connected them with the resources they needed, and worked alongside her colleagues to build a stronger network of support for those who had given so much for their country. But it wasn't just the work that changed Sarah's life. It was the people she met along the way. Every day, she saw how a simple act of kindness could have a lasting impact. She found herself surrounded by people who shared her passion for helping others, who believe in the power of giving back, and who work together to build something greater than themselves. One evening, a few months after she had started at the foundation, Sarah was invited to a fundraising event that Mr. Anderson had organized. The event was being held at a grand venue downtown, with veterans, donors, and supporters in attendance. It was the first time Sarah had attended a formal event since starting her new job, and she was both nervous and excited. She had always been uncomfortable in these kinds of settings, but she knew this was important. This was her chance to represent the foundation, to show how far it had come, and to share the stories of the veterans who had been helped by their work. As Sarah walked into the venue, her heart raced. The grand ballroom was filled with people, all mingling and chatting. The sparkling chandeliers above and the elegant decor made everything feel like a dream. It was a far cry from the small grocery store she had worked at just months before. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong in this world of wealth and influence. But then, she saw Mr. Anderson across the room, his presence commanding yet warm. He spotted her immediately and made his way toward her, a smile on his face. "Sarah," he said warmly as he approached, "I'm so glad you could make it. You've done incredible work, and tonight is all about celebrating that." Sarah smiled, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. "Thank you," she said, trying to hide her nervousness. "This is all so overwhelming." Mr. Anderson laughed gently. You've earned your place here. Sarah, you've made an incredible impact on so many lives. Just look at the veterans in this room. They are living proof of that. Sarah looked around the room and saw familiar faces, veterans she had worked with closely, all of them looking proud and confident. It was a reminder of just how far they had come and how much they had accomplished together. Later that evening, as Sarah made her way around the room, she spoke with many of the veterans who had benefited from the Foundation's programs. She heard their stories of triumph and perseverance, of battles fought both on the front lines and in their personal lives. Their gratitude filled her with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. It wasn't just about helping them find a roof over their heads or a job to support their families. It was about giving them dignity, hope, and a renewed sense of pride. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah found herself standing at the back of the room, looking out over the crowd. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She had come so far, from the struggles of her past to this moment of success and fulfillment. But it wasn't just her success that mattered. It was the success of the Foundation, of the veterans, and of the people she had helped. She had built something meaningful, something that had touched so many lives. And in doing so, she had built a better future for her children as well. Just as she was about to leave, Mr. Anderson came up to her, his eyes shining with pride. "Sarah, I want to thank you again for everything you've done. You've brought something special to this foundation, something that money can't buy. Your heart, your compassion, it's what's made all the difference." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me a chance when I had nothing left. I'll never forget that." Mr. Anderson smiled. "You don't need to thank me. It's you who has done the work. You've shown us all what it means to make a real difference." As Sarah walked out of the event that night, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The world outside was cold, but inside, she felt warm, filled with purpose, filled with pride, and filled with hope for the future. In the weeks that followed, Sarah continued to work tirelessly at the Foundation, growing in confidence and skill. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving, and she was making a real impact on the lives of those who needed it most. At home, things were better than they had ever been. Tommy and Emily were thriving, and they could finally enjoy the simple pleasures of life without the constant worry of how they would make ends meet. Sarah had created a future for them, a future full of possibilities. As she looked at her children, playing together in the living room, Sarah knew that her life had changed forever. She had been given a second chance, a chance to not only build a better life for her children, but to give back to the world in a way she had never imagined. It had all started with a small act of kindness, one simple gesture of helping a man who needed it, and that act had changed everything. Merry Christmas. May this season bring you peace, joy, and the warmth of family. Let kindness light the way in your life. And remember that even the smallest acts can create the biggest changes. Where in the world are you watching from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and transformation. This story reminds us of the profound impact even the smallest acts of kindness can have on our lives and those around us. If you found this story moving, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories to help us spread these powerful messages of compassion. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep spreading kindness, and may your days be filled with hope and love.